Gary Nickerson.
And I'm Quinn Taggart.
And this is Outside My Window.
This week's chat is with the Honourable Zach Churchill. In his past dozen-plus years in provincial politics, he's been our MLA, a member of the cabinet of 2 premiers, and is currently the leader of the official opposition and leader of the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia. We caught up with Zach at his constituency office in Yarmouth. Zach, thanks a lot for joining us in. I want to read something off of the PC Nova Scotia's website. Quote, "The challenges in front of us are serious. Fixing our healthcare system, creating jobs, and rebuilding our economy will be the biggest challenges facing us all, because if we have the right plan, we can do it." Do they even have a plan? I mean, Houston's a CA for crying out loud, but he doesn't seem to grasp some of the math that goes into getting the job done.
Well, I don't think they have a plan. They said they did in the last election in their platform, Solutions for Nova Scotia. They scrapped that. You know, that platform has been taken off the internet. So the facts are is that Tim Houston inherited a really strong economy because, in part, because of 8 years of Stephen McNeil's government, which was governed by or led by the Ivany Commission report, where exports were going up, particularly lobsters, which was good for our area. A lot of focus on the Chinese market, and because there was sustainable population growth, not population growth like Tim Houston has right now, where he's trying to double the population while we've run out of houses and while our healthcare system's being overrun. But sustainable, slow growth to our population. So the fact is that Tim Houston actually inherited a very strong economic situation in Nova Scotia that he had nothing to do with. He was lucky in inheriting that. And he also inherited a very strong financial position, a fiscal position, because under Stephen McNeil in particular, and Ian, tough decisions were made to make sure that we were living within our means. So he inherited a really strong fiscal situation too. And he's getting a lot more money from the federal government than happened previously. And I'm worried that he's squandering a lot of it because there is no plan. It seems to be a lot of decision-making based around capturing headlines, creating optics, and not focused on outcomes. And I think it's the longer his government goes on, the more we're going to see the big sums of money he's spending, the more it's going to become clear that it's not having the impact that he's telling us it is.
The thing that concerns me the most, just as the average citizen, is, how does this stuff get paid for? Promises are great. Well, we'll go out and we'll hire 1,000 doctors, right? That might not be the exact quote, but I think it was close to what he said he was going to do. A, where do you put them? Because there's no housing left for them to live in. But then B, you can't just go out and hire 1,000 doctors. If that was possible, you would have done it as health minister.
Well, if you look at some of the big things that he's spent money on, let's use the bonus for nurses and healthcare workers, right? I will first say those folks definitely deserve bonuses for the incredible work that they went through going through COVID, but he spent $464 million on that program, and he said it's going to bring back 2,000 nurses. 148 came back to the system. So you have a very clear example there of him reacting to negative headlines about there being a shortage of nurses. And instead of dealing with the root causes that are driving nurses out of the healthcare system and making it hard to recruit new ones, which are working conditions, not salary, he spent close to $500 million, and we didn't get much out of it. Half the people I talked to who received that bonus are upset about it because they got taxed on it, or they were prorated because they were out with cancer treatment or maternity leave. The paramedics were upset because they didn't get as much as the nurses. So you have this recruitment and retention plan that seemed to upset as many people as are happy with it. And more importantly, it didn't achieve the objective of getting 2,000 nurses back into the system. If you look at the Auditor General reports, he is spending billions of dollars outside of his own approved budget. And according to the Auditor General, this isn't according to me as the opposition leader, but according to the Auditor General, She looked at close to another $500 million, which didn't include the healthcare bonus. She's saying the tender processes aren't being followed, procurement processes aren't being followed, so there's single source contracts being given out. In some cases, it looks like to Tory-friendly firms in large sums of money. And there's been close to $500 million where there was no demonstrated need for that spending.
So where does the accountability come for that, though?
Well, it's supposed to come in the legislature, and the budget's passed, and you're supposed to stick to the budget. But Houston is not sticking to his budget. He's spending billions of dollars outside of it. And again, if this was achieving good things and our healthcare system was improving, and cost of living issues weren't impacting so many people, if poverty wasn't going up, if food insecurity wasn't going up, I'd say, okay, well, maybe there's some value to this spending. But he's spending billions of dollars of taxpayers' money, and many parts of the healthcare system are getting worse. We have twice as many people without a family doctor. The emergency departments are overrun at every single emergency department in the province. Many rural emergency departments have closed. We still have major vacancies in the healthcare system. And going outside of healthcare, you've got a situation in Nova Scotia where we've gone from being one of the most affordable places to live in the country to one of the most expensive in 2.5 years. Poverty rates have increased. Food insecurity has gone up over the last 2.5 years. We now have 1/3 of visits to food banks is youth and children. So if you look at some of those societal outcomes and healthcare outcomes, you don't see things moving in the right direction. And I think that speaks to the fact that he doesn't have a plan other than to get reelected, which is why anyone who's paying attention will notice that they spend more time attacking the opposition, attacking liberals, than they do, I think, when it comes to making decisions. And when you're in government, I don't understand it, because he's in government, he's got a majority government, he's still popular. He doesn't really need to worry about what we're saying right now, to be honest. But he is so obsessed with beating his opponents that I think he's missing the opportunity that's presented right in front of him. That's to give good government to people and have a big positive impact on the lives of people in Nova Scotia.
Now, obviously, he can call an election whenever he wants, but based on legislation, we're looking, in July of 2025 at the latest. What does the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia need to do to prepare for when that comes around so that you can address these core concerns of the average Nova Scotian?
So if he keeps his word, the first piece of legislation he passed, the first law, Bill 1, was a fixed election date. And he made an argument in the House that said this is to improve democracy, and he promised this in the campaign. So if he keeps his word and follows the law that he passed, it'll be in July 2025. I don't know that we can trust that. So we're getting ready as quickly as possible in case he decides to go early, if he thinks it's to his advantage. So that entails recruiting good, high-quality candidates. And as importantly, making sure we have policies and a platform ready that deal with the big issues of our time, and more importantly, not just the issues of right now, but what are the challenges we're going to face over the next 10 to 20 years, and what investments can government make now to help. A big focus of ours has been in the last year on the cost of living and affordability. This is an issue that's affecting everybody from fixed income seniors to working class families who are making tough decisions on whether they can send their kids to hockey or summer camp or piano lessons or not, because their bills are high, their taxes are going up. And I think most concerningly is the generation of young people coming up who are getting frustrated and losing hope on whether they can afford a future in this province, whether they'll ever be able to afford a home in particular, whether they can ever build a family here. So you're actually
afford a home's one thing, paying the rent's another thing.
Well, it's both unattainable for a lot of people now. So Nova Scotia, and again, it's important for people to know this, the increase to things like rent have gone up more in Nova Scotia than anywhere else in the province. So I think in the last couple of years, it's gone up 21%. The housing market has shot through the roof. We know that here in Yarmouth, where you used to wonder whether you should pay $250,000 for a 4-bedroom home, and now people have those properties listed for $500,000-$600,000.
$250 used to get you an island.
Yeah, so it's changed significantly in a very short period of time. So young people I talk to all over the province are, I mean, that's affecting everybody, but young people in particular that are looking to graduate or build a future here are like, can I do that? Because Nova Scotia also still has some of the highest taxes. So, I think people are okay with high taxes when the cost of living was low and when the population was going down to keep up with the demands on government services. But the fact is, population has been growing. The provincial government has been swimming in money. Tim Houston's been spending that all over the place. We've been advocating to cut the HST along with lowering income tax in Nova Scotia so that we actually have a more competitive and affordable tax structure here. I don't think we need to be the highest tax province in the country anymore when we've seen such levels of economic growth and population growth. So those are things that we've been advocating for, and I think we've got the money right now in the province to do it. He's brought in close to $4 billion in new revenues since he's been premier. That's a lot of money. And we could spend $500 million of that to give it back to people in cutting the sales tax and income tax.
If the feds stick to their timeline for an election, we're almost kind of back to back, because it would be July 2025 for the province and then roughly October of 2025 for the feds. How does the priorities in Nova Scotia align with the federal government? Are we kind of in the same with other provinces? Are we on the same line?
Well, if other provinces have a similar fixed election date, I don't know that any have a fixed election date in the summer. We might be the only ones that have that. Honestly, I think it's kind of a crazy time to have an election. We did it in the last provincial, but that was coming out of COVID and in between waves, and just
we were just trying to pick a date that made sense.
Oh yeah, just to try to get it in well. The at the time again, the approach to COVID was very different, and people were a lot more fearful, and there wasn't the protections in place. But
are the things that people in BC thinking about, similar to us here on the East Coast? I mean, food insecurity, economy, high taxes.
If you look at what the federal parties are talking about and the issues that get in the media in other provinces, it's very similar to here. So housing issue across the board in Canada, becoming a much more acute issue here. Again, we have kind of specific issues with housing because our rents are going up more than other places in the country. Our housing market the costs of it have gone up more than other parts of the country. We're like catching up to other more expensive housing markets. And affordability overall. Again, everybody's feeling the pinch right now. Whether it's the price at the pumps, whether it's the cost for food, whether it's power bills. Here in Nova Scotia, power bills have gone up 15% in the last 2 years. This impacts people. It impacts their, their quality of life for those that are, financially stable. For those that aren't, and again, this now includes, it's not just low income folks we're talking about. It's working class families who are bringing in double digit incomes. It's affecting serious life choices, and people are getting frustrated. Even if it's just, okay, I can't take my kids to the movies anymore, or my kids can't go in ballet. We can't afford that. It doesn't meet the budget anymore. I mean, these are tough decisions that families have to make, and it's upsetting to folks. And I think there's tools provincially and federally, of course, but I'm focused on provincial issues. There's tools that we could be using provincially to help.
And I mean, this spirals out into a variety of other things. I mean, as food insecurity stress goes up, and monetary stress goes up, and price at the pumps and all that, it does affect people's mental health, quality of life. Circles back into healthcare, which is, in a complete mess right now. How do we stop that cyclone?
You just nailed it. So, social determinants of health. Whether you have a place to live, whether you can afford to put proper food on your table, or whether you're food insecure, whether you're energy insecure and cold in the wintertime. All of these things do impact people's health. When people are stressed out, when they can't afford proper nutrition, when they're homeless, obviously, they get sick. And I've talked to a number of emergency doctors in the province that say there's a certain demographic that's showing up right now. It's people that are on the lower side of the income spectrum. It's folks that are dealing with homelessness. Of course, addiction issues, which get worse when people are struggling with poverty and stress. So all of these factors are showing up in our hospital system and putting more pressure on it. And we have to do a better job paying attention to it, or we're going to be chasing our tail in healthcare for a long time. And I'm worried about there being a big generational gap in wealth, in poverty, and in have and have-nots, because, like I said, the people who have bought property, who own houses, who own assets, are in a much better position than the new young crop coming up that can't afford to get those things right now and that are paying the highest rents in the country.
Yeah, they can afford the rent, but then when you go to the bank, they say you can't afford a mortgage, which is less than the rent.
Right. And so you're going to have this generational gap, I think, in wealth, because those of us, myself included, again, if nothing goes wrong and things don't, there's not like a big market collapse, but generally speaking, the price of the value of land and housing has continually gone up. So you're going to have the situation where those of us that have been able to purchase property are probably going to benefit from that over the long run. And those that can't are going to fall behind. And I'm particularly concerned about that. And I think we need to start wrapping our heads around, okay, what policy solutions are there? How do we make life more affordable here? Are there things that government can do that deal with the housing situation in a way that's not going to, make inflation worse or drive the costs up more? And there are jurisdictions that are approaching housing, like Austin, Texas, like British Columbia, that are having some success in actually stabilizing prices, bringing rents down, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can look at what these jurisdictions are doing and replicate some of that here.
Now, certainly, when you look at the history of party in power in Nova Scotia, post World War II, you guys are running about 50-50 with the Conservatives. But post late 70s, it's been more PC than Liberal. So, people love to lay blame where it goes. But if the Liberals were to win the next election, are you expecting things to be worse than what you interpret it to possibly be? That's usually one of the things that happens when you get in. You start, pulling back the covers on things, and it's like, holy crap, this is way worse than what they were telling us.
I don't know. I think if you look at the amount of money that's come from the federal government, if you look at the increased revenues from taxes, if you look at the foundations of the economy, there's some strong indicators there. So I don't, at this point, anticipate getting in there and thinking the financial situation's worse. I do think we'll be in a position where we could provide tax relief and more tax, create a more competitive tax environment for people, take some financial pressure off. And I think we'd be in a great position and I think we have to be doing this now, because the decisions that are made over the next few years, I think, will impact, the next decade or perhaps the next 2 decades. So I'd love to get back in there and be able to make some serious decisions and tackle these issues. So I think we'll be in a good position, if we can win the next election, to have a more progressive, fair approach to housing, a more fiscally conservative approach to finances and taxes, because Liberals in Nova Scotia tend to be more conservative on the financial side and more responsible with the money. And if you see, after, I understand Liberal politics more in Nova Scotia now, because Liberals tend to come in after, the PC government of the 1980s that signed a lot of checks, spent a lot of money, drove the province into debt, And the next Liberal government may be coming in after a Houston run where he's doing the same thing. So I mean, it's out of necessity that Liberals have been more fiscally conservative here, because we do tend to come in after big spending, big check writing conservative governments. But I think if we can just be more responsible, focus less on the partisan politics, and focus more on good decision making, I think we can actually get somewhere. And again, one of I think a very fair criticism of the Houston government is they're more focused on, I think, partisan politics sometimes, I think, in a very petty way, than actually focusing attention on making the right policies and the right decisions. And that shows in the fact that Houston's made 7 decisions in the last 4 months that he's had to flip-flop on, because they're not well thought through. The homework wasn't done. And again, the reason for making those decisions seemed to be more about looking after his donors or capturing headlines.
I know from just talking with folks on the street, people are tired of this back and forth crap.
Yeah.
Right? Is there any common ground between the Liberals and the Conservatives that you guys could work on some stuff for the benefit of all Nova Scotians?
Absolutely. And we actually did see a number of things that we'd been advocating for in the provincial budget. So universal school lunch program. We've been pushing for that we were in the process of negotiating that when we were in government, but we've, since losing the election, been pushing for that for the last 3 years. Indexing income tax to inflation is something that we've tabled legislation on 4 or 5 times, and covering continuous glucose monitors for diabetic patients. These are good things that we've been pushing for, and while I feel that the government moved on them to kind of co-opt our ideas and take them from us, because they are now running partisan ads saying that we're against these things, which I just drives me nuts, right? And again, it's a motivation and issue with these folks and where their focus is. But at the end of the day, those ideas were so powerful that the government moved on them. And whether they want to, be silly and tell people that we were against them when we advocated for them for 3 years or not, what's important to me is that they actually get in there, and hopefully they'll be implemented in a way that's going to have the impact that we want it to. So yeah, there's certainly some things there. Again, my big issue with this government is I do feel they're a lot more motivated to hang on to power and stay there than they are about seizing the opportunity that's in front of them to make some real tough but necessary decisions. And so that's the trend of decision making that I'm really unhappy about.
Now, certainly when you come to an election, there's a selection of people that vote for you. There's a selection of people that don't. But in the end, the government of the day is supposed to represent all Nova Scotians. How do you find that common ground? How do you find your way through all that?
Well, debate's part of it, right? I mean, people get kind of tired of the back and forth, but the fact is that we do have to have and do have substantial debate on policies, on legislation. So no one party owns a monopoly on good ideas, and democracy works well when we are competing over ideas and when we are debating ideas and when constructive feedback is taken and things get improved. So part of the cut and thrust of politics is necessary, I think, to make sure we've got the best legislation, the best ideas on how to help. It's when it gets more personal than around the policies, I think, is where we all lose our way a little bit. And for some reason, people, pay attention more when the back and forth is personal than when it's policy oriented. But I think that's just part of the human condition and our nature. But democracy works best when it's about policy and ideas and good robust debate about what are the best options to spend money on, what are the best options to change laws, and what can have the greatest impact on the lives of people for the longest amount of time. That's when it works the best.
Right now, of course, at the federal level, Liberals are polling about a little more than half, than the PCs who are not in power. Are you worried that with the closeness of the potential election dates, that Nova Scotia voters are going to get caught up in that? Like if the color changes at the federal level, are you worried that maybe people will do that sympathy vote thing at our end and say, shoot, if we don't vote PC and get the PCs in, we're gonna be screwed at the federal level because we'll have a mismatch?
Well, they tend to go the opposite, actually, most of the time. So, like, I've been in politics. It'll be 14 years this summer. So I have an appreciation for the political cycles. So, yeah, I am worried about the federal situation. The government's been there, I think coming up on 10 years, and the population seems to want a change every 10 years pretty consistently, whether it's, Mulroney to Chrétien, Martin to Harper to Trudeau. You do see these big changes.
Don't forget Kim Campbell in there.
So Mulroney, Kim Campbell to Chrétien,
6 months.
Chrétien, Martin to Harper, Trudeau to if it changes next time. So yeah, that is a challenge definitely right now, where we're at in the political cycle, where the public sentiment is toward the Liberal brand, which is right now. I mean, most people are more focused on federal politics than provincial politics. And it's challenging for us because we are a more centrist party right now than the federal party, the provincial Liberal Party. Again, I mentioned the fact that we tend to be more fiscal conservative in the Liberal Party in Nova Scotia, mostly out of necessity. But also some of the things we're fighting for right now, like cutting the HST, making a more competitive tax environment here. That's not really in alignment with the federal party right now. So it is challenging because people might not be paying attention to what we're saying on these things just because we're, a liberal's a liberal in the minds of most people. But there are some differences between provincial and federal policy, even amongst liberals, and we've had moments of disagreement. Like on the carbon tax would be a clear example where provincially we fought for and got a cap and trade system, which meant the bigger polluters paid. And that money that was collected was then redistributed to normal everyday Nova Scotians in heat pump programs and electric vehicle rebates, et cetera. We still are opposed to a carbon tax provincially. We're pro pollution pricing, but we like a model where you charge the bigger polluters and not the everyday consumer. So there are big policy differences like that, which are hard to get across to people when they're upset or focused on federal politics, for sure.
And I mean, those rebate programs. I've done finance and admin for many years, not a CA or anything like that, but still, I mean, I understand numbers and I understand the math, but it never comes back to you in more than what you're paying in. It's nice to have a little bit coming back from the federal government.
Like in the carbon tax
model,
you mean?
Yeah, exactly, for the environmental thing or even a GST rebate. But I mean, the people that are, the bar has gone up, right? I mean, with inflation being what it is and cost of everything going, the bar stayed really low. But somebody like myself who's in the working middle class, I don't qualify for an HST rebate. I don't necessarily qualify for a carbon tax rebate, but I'm paying for it.
Well, and it differs from the rural experience to the urban experience to the rural experience. So, if you're living in Halifax or Toronto and there's a robust public transit network, you're not really driving a lot. You might be on the better end of that. But when you're living in Yarmouth and have to drive to Halifax for medical appointments, or Bridgewater, we have to drive to work, there's not infrastructure in place right now for electric vehicle charging stations. Electric vehicles are pretty expensive too. Not all of them, but the ones with longer distance are. You don't really have the opportunity to get the behavioral change here either. So that's why we like the model where the big polluters pay. That money is then dispersed to regular, everyday working people, normal people, and they can actually achieve energy savings in their home or in their vehicles. And it's not them paying for it; it's the bigger corporate polluters. So that's still a model I think in the Nova Scotia context would work the best.
Not to jinx anything, but let's say the color changes on the next provincial election. Liberals get in. Let's assume a workable majority or a workable minority. What does the first 100 days look like?
We do a tax review and lower people's taxes and save them money. We tackle, we'll have a plan that we're going to present to Nova Scotians on housing. We bring forward some really bold ideas and solutions to the housing crisis. And we have to take a hard look at the growing rates of poverty in Nova Scotia and figure out how to deal with that, because that, again, affects healthcare outcomes. It impacts people's lives on an individual basis, but it impacts our economy and our society overall too. So I think those are, the three top of mind issues right now that need to be dealt with. But we'll have a fully costed out platform, and we're going to run on what we think the right ideas are for not just right now, but for the future.
So you're looking beyond a 4-year run? I mean, generally when you put your plan together,
for our policies,
right?
I think I think we've got a government right now that's focused on the next election. I think we need to be focused on the next generation. We got some real issues that are developing that we've got to try to get ahead of before it's too late. So yeah, when it comes to developing a platform and policy, it's going to be forward looking.
Now, when you look at politics in general, and we had this conversation with the women in politics just recently when we had a panel, is you're looking at the older folks, and I'll use hand quotes when I say older folks. How do you get younger people involved in politics? What would be the appeal to somebody under 25 or 25 and under or whatever to want to be engaged in politics, be it municipal, federal, provincial?
Well, right now, young people care about our climate. They care about how we plan to make ourselves more resistant to climate change and how we try to mitigate the impacts of climate change. That's something that the next generation coming up are very concerned about overall. And then in their own lives, they're worried about housing and affordability. So, we've got to be focused on issues that matter to these folks. And they have legitimate worries, frustrations, anger, concerns over all these things, right? They're coming into a situation that is very different than the one I graduated into, and they have a different set of problems than my generation currently has. Again, where are they going to live? How are they going to afford to own a home someday? Because most people do want to do that. How are they going to build a family? How are they going to afford the taxes of the province and the increased cost to everything? Because even when inflation settles down and levels out, it's not going backwards. These prices are here to stay. I think, how do we develop policy solutions to think about them and how to ensure that they can thrive and succeed here in this province so they don't leave, because we know what it's like to have a brain drain. We went through it in this province before when our economy wasn't strong or resilient, and we don't want to go back to that.
But we're also seeing that drain, since you brought that up, unfortunately with doctors. We're recruiting doctors in, but they're leaving almost as fast as they're coming in.
Well, it's not just doctors. So I've talked to doctors certainly, and other professionals that make decent money, and they've moved here from other parts of the country, Alberta and Ontario in particular. And a number of them are leaving because they didn't know how expensive it was to live here, because everyone based those decisions on a time when it was Nova Scotia is a very affordable place to live. The East Coast was a very affordable place to live. And, I talked to one person in particular, they couldn't find childcare for their kids. So the wife couldn't work. His wife couldn't work. That's half their income gone. And despite the fact he was making six figures, he said I couldn't afford to stay here because of the high property income and sales tax on everything. So he went back home or is in the process of going back home to Alberta, where he's paying half or less of the taxes. So that's why I think it's important to really look at those things. And again, look at them at a time when we've got money in the provincial treasury, like in the provincial bank account, to do something about it.
What can we do at a provincial level, since we're talking healthcare professionals, to make it easier for professionals to come in from out of country?
So this is one area where the provincial government, the Houston government, I think has made some positive moves, and I've got no problem saying that, where they have reduced the accreditation. I think stepped into the realm of the College of Physicians a little bit to reduce the red tape and the qualifications. So there is a balance you have to find with that, because not the medical culture in all countries is not the same, and doctors that are trained in under other systems don't necessarily have the same kind of Western approach, and that can be impacted either by their religion, their culture, or whatever. It particularly mostly impacts women's health and how that's approached. So you have to find the right balance there to make sure we're not, in pursuit of getting as many as we can, reducing our quality here and making an unsafe situation for patients in Nova Scotia. And that goes for doctors or nurses or whomever. So I do think there can be some adjustments made, but also public safety still has to be the paramount driver of who we're letting in and how many we are, and how much we reduce the necessary qualifications. I do think there's room to reduce some of those, because even Canadians that are trained in Western medical university are having a hard time getting back in practice.
It's not portable.
It doesn't make any sense.
That was one thing that kind of boggled my mind a little bit, was that you trained in Canada, but in a different province, but you're not portable.
Yeah, because that's more like that. That's a problem, and that seems to be more about controlling the supply to keep the value up of those professions than actually solving the social and healthcare issues. So I do think that's where you have to make the adjustments, right? Where it makes sense. Obviously, the medical training is on par. Obviously, if they're Canadian, they're coming back with our values that can be applied to how they provide healthcare. And in those circumstances, we have to do a much better job.
Now, certainly the Dow School of Nursing has found it's not innovative, but they found an approach that works by, offering scholarships, full rides.
But they're still having a hard time filling the seats.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. But incentivizing folks to stay in their home province has got to have some sort of value to that.
It does, and governments of all stripes have brought in those incentives. We brought in a major rebate for medical tuition, so we gave money back to doctors, covered the cost of their tuition. There wasn't much uptake on it. Right now, there's a lot of focus on bursaries and bonuses for nurses. That's still not working. So at the end of the day, we've got to look at where the problem is, and one of the issues is in the working conditions. So, it doesn't matter for some people. It doesn't matter how much money they make if they can never have vacation. If they're faced with traumatic circumstances in our emergency departments day in, day out, and can't get a break. So how do we improve those working conditions in our hospitals? How do we do a better job supporting patients and supporting our staff? And again, that's I think that's one of the biggest factors right now contributing whether people want to get into medicine or not. And we also have to contend with the fact that for everybody now, there's all these other working opportunities. How many people are now working from home for a firm out of the States or out of Toronto and making more money? These are factors too. People make the assumption that everyone's not working anymore because there's all these labor vacancies. But mostly it's just that the opportunities that exist for people to work in so many different, for so many different businesses and different sectors is they abound now, right? And I've got friends here in Yarmouth that quit what were well-paying local jobs, and they're making more money and working from home. and that's certainly impacting, I think, our labor market here. It's great because we can get people to move here and they can work remotely for whomever, but in filling our own kind of domestic labor market, it's creating some challenges.
It sure does. And I mean, if COVID did nothing else for us, it definitely showed that you could get productivity working from home in sectors that you probably didn't think that was going to be possible or plausible for. I know, for my day job, I could be anywhere. I could be on a beach in Cuba. And as long as the internet's stable and works well, nobody'd ever, quote unquote, know the difference.
And like a lot of young people love that, right? So you see the videos of people, talking about what they do either on social media or YouTube. And there's a big, movement to, travel the world and work from the train with the high speed you're on, or work from the airport and then go see the world. And, obviously that's appealing to a lot of people. But we got to wrap our head around that, because we are having right now, and I think we'll continue to have real issues with filling jobs that need to be filled in healthcare. There's a shortage of teachers now. I mean, when I started in politics close to 14 years ago, substitute teachers couldn't find full-time work. Some of them were working, were subbing for years. Now they can't find substitutes.
Bus drivers,
even talking to small business people that, have niche kind of services, whether they're digging holes for, the Department of Transportation to put signs in, or doing, marina work at in Chester. They're not finding people that want to buy their businesses and take them over. Farmers, the agriculture sector is probably dealing with that more than anybody else, right? The succession planning issue. People that come from farming families are like, no, I want to do something else. It's hard. It's hard work. I never get a break. You don't make a lot of money. So I mean, these are things we got to really start wrapping our head around, because I think they will get worse if there's not the appropriate kind of government and private sector attention to them.
So what's the next 6 months look like?
Well, I mean, opposition is, there's things I like about it and there's things I don't. Like a lot of it is reacting to government decisions and government spending and government legislation. So of course that's part of my job. And I just try to be, as straight as I can on that stuff and tell people how I see it. But we just keep talking to people, wrapping our head around these big issues that are impacting people's lives, whether it's affordability, whether it's healthcare, whether it's housing, whether it's climate, and make sure, or energy prices, and make sure we've got, good ideas to run on in the next election. And, we've had a lot of success finding good people that want to run for us. And just keep plugging away and see when the Premier calls the election. Again, if he keeps his word, it'll be in July 2025, but it wouldn't be the first time that he didn't. So we're trying to do our best to prepare for an early one just in case.
We want to thank the Honourable Zach Churchill and his staff for always making himself available to chat with us on the podcast.
I'm Gary Nickerson.
And I'm Quinn Taggart.
And this has been Outside My Window.